Hello, welcome to another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah Rice, joined this week again by Will Denner. And Will, we are coming down the home stretch of the high school football season in Southwest Washington. Week 8 is going to determine the postseason destiny for a lot of teams. We're talking about Washougal, Columbia River, Mountain View, Kelso, Castle Rock, Kingsway. We're going to get to the league title chases next week with some big games in week 9. But today we're going to talk about some of the crucial week 8 matchups that could determine whether teams extend their season into the postseason.
Yeah, it's really a make or break week for a lot of teams, and hard to believe that only 2 weeks left in the regular season. So it's coming down to the wire here for a lot of teams.
Yeah, well, we'll go down each league and kind of lay out all the different scenarios. But before we do that, I got to make sure to give our weekly shout out to First Pacific Financial. We are, of course, coming to you from the First Pacific Financial studio in downtown Vancouver. Thank you to them for supporting the show, for supporting high school athletics, and of course, supporting the community at large. But when we were kind of charting out the different scenarios for each league, it really kind of laid bare, how many different possibilities and how many different forks in the road could be decided this week in week 8. And ironically, one of the leagues that really isn't going to be subject to that is the 4A, just because everything in the 4A is kind of building up to the gargantuan Week 9 clash between Skyview and Camas, the two teams that have looked far and away two of the best teams, not only in Southwest Washington, but also statewide. So we're going to cover that ad nauseum next week. But for week 8, we'll go to the 3As. And the 3A Greater St. Helens League has a massive game coming up this Friday with Kelso and Mountain View. It's a case where the winner of this is going to really set themselves up to extend their season beyond week 9. And there's a couple different possibilities, including the dreaded 3-team playoff if we end up getting to it.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody, us included, wants to go into something like that again. I feel like we were just talking before we went on air today, and just kind of how that's a tough way, obviously, to end your season, and just kind of it's kind of counterintuitive to a typical football game, and then you have to play the game on a Monday or Tuesday. So let's hope that they can decide it on the field in these next 2 weeks of the regular season.
Well, first, let's set the stage for what this year's Kelso versus Mountain View game means. And first of all, before looking ahead, we'll look back. The last 2 years, this game has been incredibly close. Of course, if you follow football, especially the 3A Greater St. Helens League, you remember last year's game came down to overtime, Mountain View making a crucial stop on a 2-point conversion attempt to win that game 35-34, a game that ended up basically clinching the league title for the Thunder. The previous year, Kelso was the one making a big defensive stand, getting an interception in the end zone to win that 28-26 en route to the league title for the Highlanders. What does this one mean? Well, Kelso enters week 8 with just one league loss, that coming to Evergreen, an Evergreen team which, if it wins this week, can wrap up a share of the league title. So a win for Kelso would do make enormous progress for the Highlanders to clinch the second of just 2 postseason berths coming out of the 3A Greater St. Helens League. However, if Mountain View wins, it gets a little more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that in both of those last 2 years, it was the road team that won at home venues that I would say both teams have a good home field advantage at. But this Mountain View team that started 0-5, has won the games that mattered so far. After they lost their opener in the league to Prairie, they've come back with wins against Heritage and Shelton. And really, I think the key for them in these past few weeks has been a focus on limiting their mistakes, kind of cutting out the penalties and kind of correlating with that, getting their offense to to open up a little bit. Obviously, Jaden Brown had another big game last week with 4 touchdowns, but they've kind of seen some complementary playmakers, rise to the occasion around them. Players like Dylan Huber and Dallas Hobbs, Caden Reinbach, and they've kind of figured their quarterback situation out a little bit more now as well. And then really, it's for this Mountain View team against Kelso. I would say going into the season, it seemed like Kelso definitely had, I would say, a little bit of a higher profile and how they handled these first few weeks. But now it really comes down to this, and another part too is just the running back showdown. It will be between Aiden Montagna and Jaden Brown. Should be a really good game, and this Mountain View team has given itself a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting that Jaden Brown really kind of found his rhythm after Mountain View answered its questions about its quarterback play. I remember it was kind of a work in progress the first half of the season until Cashton Leakey really found his role with this quick passing game. And once that sort of became established, then things really opened up for the running game.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think also their defense has it's been good all year long. I think their offense is kind of the defense was kind of put in some tough positions, I think, by the offense. But when we went into the season, we were kind of talking about their experienced line play on both sides of the ball, and it took a little while, obviously, for the offense to find its stride. But their D line is really experienced as well. That should be a really good matchup against a Kelso team that always seems to have a big, fierce O line and a good running back behind them. So should be an interesting one. I wouldn't surprise me if it's a little bit of a low scoring game.
But if Mountain View wins, the Thunder would actually have a chance to claim at least a share of the league title in Week 9 in their annual rivalry matchup against Evergreen. Yeah. Because if the Thunder, if they win on Friday, they'll be riding a 3-game win streak into that game. They would have everything to play for as far as getting a share of the league title. However, if they lose Week 9 against Evergreen, then you open the possibility that you'd have Mountain View at 3-2. Kelso, if they take care of business and beat Shelton, they could be 3-2. And Prairie, if they beat Heritage on Week 9, then they could be 3-2. And that's when you get into this 3-team tiebreaker that we talked about not wanting to see.
Right. And this is obviously partly because of as you mentioned, the only having 2 postseason berths in this 6-team league. I think we've found out that it will go to 3 next year. So there will be 1 more spot available, but it's really, really tight now at the top of this league. And even last week, I think there were 4 teams bunched up for second place. And then meanwhile, Evergreen has put itself in position to control its own destiny and beating both Kelso and Prairie in the same year. I think for only the second time since they reclassified to 3A all the way back in 2016. So they've put themselves in a really good position as well, and just now have to take care of business against Heritage and Mountain View. But as we've seen in this league, that's easier said than done.
You can never take anything for granted. I learned that early in watching high school football.
Absolutely.
So let's go to the always unpredictable, always dramatic Class 2A Greater St. Helens League. And what we have entering Week 8 is we have the 2 favorites, Ridgefield and Woodland. They are on a collision course for another Week 9 showdown that should decide the league title. Both of them are 5-0. They've really separated themselves from the rest of the pack. However, behind them, you have 4 teams within a game of each other. You have 2 3-2 teams, Washougal and Mark Morris. You have 2 teams at 2-3. That's Columbia River and R.A. Long. The Greater St. Helens League in the 2A gets 4 berths outright to Week 10 and a 5th spot to go into a Tuesday pigtail tiebreaker. So all those teams, Washougal, Mark Morris, Columbia River, and R.A. Long, are needing a win, a crucial win this week to try to get one of those berths outright, if not try to get into that 5th spot and not be the one team that's kind of the odd team out and sees its season end on Week 9.
Right, and that Washougal River game in particular, I think, is the big one to circle this week because as it stands right now, Washougal is in 3rd place, even though they lost their first 2 games of the league slate. That was against Woodland and Ridgefield, those 2 top dogs, and as we've seen, like you said, they have really separated themselves. Washougal, though, is already in a good spot because they already have wins against both Mark Morris and R.A. Long, so they would theoretically have that head-to-head tiebreaker. And they've already gotten 2 shutouts in the league, which is impressive. Another shout out to their defense. But then River on the other side, a team that we weren't totally sure about coming into the year, they've kind of quietly hung around and stayed in the postseason picture. They're looking to try and get back to the postseason for the first time since 2021. They also, I believe, lost their 2 games of the league slate, but a win Friday against Washougal would go a long way for them. And then they have Hudson's Bay in week 9. So a lot to play for there. And then, even R.A. Long, I mean, they do have to face Ridgefield this week, which will be tough, but there's a chance now that week 9 R.A. Long Mark Morris rivalry game becomes a really big one and potentially could determine whether a team gets to the postseason or not. And, I think going into the year, we kind of thought the 2A would be maybe like a 5-team race. And although we haven't been totally correct on which 5 teams those were, it's really 6 now. And especially when you add in that 5th postseason opportunity, there's a lot of teams in the running for it.
Well, we haven't talked a lot about Columbia River this year. They've been kind of under the radar, and I think it's understandable when you consider that they were implementing a brand new offensive scheme. Second-year coach Dwayne Patterson implementing the wing T, kind of a no frills basic, rely on your line and your running backs, and really try to dictate the time of possession as you do that. And you've seen River, when they execute their game plan, they were able to get a lot of players involved in the running game, whether it's Joey Iannello or whether it's
there's Heo Del Rose, a good player too.
Yeah, and so they've been able to get those wins against teams like R.A. Long and Hawkinson that would be needed to put the Rapids in position to have meaningful games here in week 8 and week 9.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I think the identity that they were trying to forge this season was something kind of new for them. I think Dwayne Patterson was telling me before the season that it's just kind of a play style that he was comfortable in. Obviously, he's a defensive-minded coach, and I think that the whole strategy behind that was kind of having a ball control offense, long possessions, giving the defense rest, and kind of then letting them shine. And then when you had 2 junior quarterbacks coming into the year, it was kind of seen as maybe making the transition just a little bit easier on them into their first year of playing full-time varsity football. But yeah, it took a little bit of a time, I think, to get going for them, but it seems like they kind of know who they are at this point in the season. It also seems like they've had some pretty clutch special teams moments as well. I think there was a play a week or 2 ago where Preston Shearer got a blocked kick, and then it ended up being a return touchdown for them. So they've found kind of different ways to win, and like I said, they've hung around and put themselves in position to compete down the stretch here.
And I feel that the arc with Washougal is pretty similar to Mountain View, where I think we were very impressed initially with the defense of Washougal, and then they dropped a tough game to Prairie, and they kind of went under the radar a little bit. But now that defense has really been resurgent for the Panthers, and here's a team that maybe we weren't paying that much attention to 3 or 4 weeks ago that's suddenly right on our radar, playing a big game in week 8.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they were in a different position last year, but it was kind of a similar thing where it was almost like they have this slow start in league. Maybe they all of a sudden are kind of under the radar, and then they really put it together in the second half of league play. I mean, I think it's a credit to their coaching staff for making adjustments, and another team that had to obviously move on from some pretty big players last year and kind of just change who they are kind of as an offense, and often when you have a good defense, that really helps ease that transition. And so yeah, Washougal is still in a great position to get another postseason berth, and they like I said, I mean, it's tough when you start against Ridgefield and Woodland, obviously, and I think we've seen that those 2 teams are kind of in the class of their own, but right behind them right now is Washougal.
Yeah, and so because nothing is ever predictable in the 2A Greater St. Helens League, we do have to leave the door open just a little bit for something crazy to happen, and that would involve either R.A. Long knocking off Ridgefield on Friday, or Mark Morris knocking knocking off Woodland,
Yeah.
which if that happens, then you open the door to a whole bunch of different scenarios. But if the top two teams take care of business, it really is going to put the spotlight on Washougal versus Columbia River as far as which team can get an inside track into getting possibly that number 3 spot and definitely the number 4 spot.
For sure. Yeah. And we should, I think mention Mark Morris as well, because, they also kind of had a slow start in the league, but it seems like under first year coach Mike Peck, they're really kind of starting to figure out who they are, and, getting a big win on the road last week against Hawkinson, a team we've talked about that I think is still kind of better than their record shows. But Mark Morris kind of getting a little bit more of a gritty win, on a rainy night, not necessarily ideal conditions to open the passing game up and things like that. But they're in 4th place right now as it stands. And although it's a tough one against Woodland this week, they are right there in position to control their own destiny as well for a postseason berth.
All right, let's go to the always interesting 1A Trico League. And there's a huge game for postseason implications coming up on Friday between Kingsway and Castle Rock. This will go a long way to deciding the number 4 spot, perhaps even giving the winner a chance at the number 3 if that happens to be Castle Rock. We enter week 8 with Castle Rock currently 3-2 in league play, but nipping at their heels is Kingsway at 2-3. So if Castle Rock wins, then they wrap up a postseason berth and would actually have the opportunity to get up into that number 3 spot if they knock off Kalama in week 9. However, if the ascendant Kingsway Christian Knights can knock off the Rockets, then you're talking about Kingsway having that number 4 spot and a berth into the postseason, being that they would have to just take care of business in week 9 against winless Fort Vancouver, and then the Knights are in as the number 4 team in the Trico. But this is an interesting game because the last 2 weeks for me, I've seen Kingsway 2 weeks ago and I saw Castle Rock last week, and now I probably got a better read of who Kingsway is, being that they were playing against Stevenson, a team that obviously they're better than, but still a Stevenson team that you have to play really well against to win. Castle Rock, it was against Fort Vancouver, a Fort Vancouver team that is, trying to find itself and its identity under first-year coach Will Ephraim, but really didn't have the numbers on last Friday to really put up much of a challenge. But just based on what I saw, I think this is going to be an incredibly close and evenly matched game between Kingsway and Castle Rock.
Yeah, I had to go back and look. I was just curious to see where we picked Kingsway to finish in the preseason. We had them at 6th in a very tough Trico league, and it really is a credit to Coach Dale Rule and all of those coaches and players, of course, for what they've been able to do in now just 2 years, and a program that's not that far removed from not having a varsity program. And they've this is now kind of their championship week in a sense, something that a few years ago I think was kind of a far out kind of thought. But yeah, really should be a fascinating one. And although I haven't seen Kingsway yet this year, it seems like they've passed just about every test that they have, and even a game like Kalama where they kind of hung around late, and to get a postseason berth in this year would be impressive for them. Well,
the real X factor this year, and I talked with Coach Dale Rule about this player after their week 6 win over Stevenson. That's been the emergence of Caleb Silva, a kid who he's a track kid, state champion in the high jump, and Coach Rule was saying how he's just like, Caleb, you got to come out for football. Come out for football. You'll love it, I promise. And he did initially for spring ball last year as a junior, but he just happened to tweak his ankle of the first spring practice and decided, I want to stay healthy. I have aspirations to try to win a state title in the high jump for track, and which he ended up doing. And so I think Dale Rule kind of always just thought it's like, well, maybe I'll just keep bringing up the idea. And sure enough, after week 1, it was, so after the season started, Caleb Silva gives Coach Rule a call and say, hey, can I come out? He's like, well, yeah, of course, come on out. And so he does. has. He, a couple weeks to get eligible, get the minimum practices and everything. But since he's really gotten involved in the offense, he's been giving the Knights that kind of deep threat, that's track speed, that ability to really take the top off a defense that a quarterback like Owen Paulson, who's a sophomore with a strong arm, that can really open a new dimension to someone like that, to be able to have that guy who can get the ball in his hands and then good things happen.
Yeah, it's always fascinating in these small schools in particular, hearing these stories of like these athletes kind of in the hall who for one reason or another haven't joined the football team, but it seems like there's always potential there, and when you add a player like that, it can really change a whole team, really.
Well, yeah, and that would be, you had mentioned it would be a huge accomplishment for Kingsway to go from not playing varsity football to now making the postseason in the course of 3 or 4 years. I mean, that's obviously big things on the line for both Kingsway and Castle Rock this Friday. Well, this is just the warm-up act. We have an amazing Week 9 schedule where you have La Center versus Seton with the Trico League on the line. You'll have Woodland versus Ridgefield with the 2A Greater St. Helens League on the line. You could have Evergreen versus Mountain View with the 3A Greater St. Helens League on the line. And then, of course, Camas versus Skyview with the 4A Greater St. Helens League on the line, provided that both of those teams take care of business in this Friday's games in which they'll be heavy favorites. But Week 9 is going to be epic, but we've got a pretty good warm-up act here in Week 8.
Yeah, can't wait.
All right. Be sure to follow us along for all the twists and turns as the high school football season enters the home stretch. Follow us on social media, 360 Preps, and we will see you out at the field.